Two Gold and Black Live, Brian Neubert and Tom Dienhart joined me, and we never talk. I mean, it's amazing. So
not in person anyway.
Well, in person, true, but we enjoyed talking, and that's been one blessing of all this is that you've been able to hear us chatter on about whether it would be Rondale Moore last night on a simulcast to our Sunday conversation. Obviously, that's part of the fun of doing this and an interesting part of this. And Brian, I'll start with you. Rondale Moore, you've talked about that some. You've written about it. A big deal, obviously, that he comes back and decides he's going to play football at Purdue starting in practice this week, but hard to minimize the importance of all that.
Yeah, off the field, it makes Purdue a national brand again. It makes people pay attention to Purdue. It draws attention to Purdue. That stuff's, great for the program. Purdue has its star back. Purdue has its most captivating player back on the field, as I've said on multiple platforms here in the last 24 hours. It raises Purdue's ceiling. It gives Purdue a chance against anybody it plays. It gives them the chance to have the sort of offense that can, be pretty formidable, provided the quarterback play is what Purdue needs. No downside here whatsoever. Obviously, I think Rondale Moore's sheer presence alone makes that whole offense better. It makes the running back better, the running game better. It makes the quarterbacks better. It makes all those other wide receivers better. As elite a player as he is, he's an absolutely elite decoy too, and that's going to get people open. No downside to this whatsoever. Purdue got a hell of a lot better yesterday, and with a favorable schedule already in hand, some pretty good stuff's happening for Purdue football here.
Tom, the dream of having Rondale Moore and David Bell. Now, I know they played a couple of games together, but they never really, Bell was just getting going by the time Rondale's injury came about. That is, you look at the history of Purdue football, I don't think you've ever had a better tandem. That's just going to be exciting to watch that happen. And there are a lot of other guys at that position that are going to be interesting to watch too.
Yeah, hard to believe, Alan, there's ever been a more talented collection of wide receivers at Purdue than what they're going to trot out there this season, with Moore and Bell, Milton Wright, Ahmad Anderson Jr., a lot of these young players too. I'm eager to see the redshirted guys, TJ Sheffield, Mershon Rice, and then the freshmen too, Which of the four freshmen could impact Malik Carr, Colin Sullivan, Marcellus Moore, Rahman Yassin as well. I mean, again, just a cornucopia of talent at that spot. And Jeff Brom, he's got to be smiling. Diagram of plays on his napkin, on his notebook. I mean, a lot of great options there. So as Brian said, no downside here. A lot of excitement, not just for the players, but for fans too. Number 4 is back, the ultimate playmaker. I'll tell you what, guys, the speed, the strength, the power, the tenacity. I mean, he embodies it all. And, Brian talked about this before. We kind of think the guy wants to compete, Yeah. He wants to play some football. He's going to get to do that and show the world, too, that left hamstring is A-okay.
Yeah, I think that's he's about as good a competitor as you're going to find, and still set to graduate. He says in 2.5 years. This will be just another move, it seems, towards his goal of doing just that. But it also, Brian, speaks to the relationship that Jeff Brom's been able to cultivate. I mean, obviously, when Jeff Brom was teetering or considering the Louisville options, Rondale Moore was a part of that thought process. It speaks well for that brand and also that players coach mentality and who Purdue is under Jeff Brom.
Yeah, it speaks to trust. It speaks to the relationship. It speaks to trust more than anything. It speaks to the fact that Rondale Moore trusts Jeff Brom. Jeff Brom obviously, has a good relationship with Rondale Moore. Rondale Moore trusts Jeff Brom with his career. That's what this year is. This is his career after Purdue that is being put on display here this year that he's working toward. And, Rondale Moore trusts Jeff Brom and that staff enough to be willing to be part of it. Again, he didn't have to do this. He didn't have to play. He could have continued to train. He's got a pretty solid grade at this point from the NFL, I have to think, whether that's being a first rounder or at worst an early second rounder. He's got, I don't mean this in a derogatory manner, but he's got a lot to lose here. And if Purdue has a bad season or whatever it may be, or Purdue doesn't use him right, whatever it may be, his stock can only dip. And he obviously trusts Jeff Brom and Purdue enough to not worry about that kind of stuff because he knows he's going to get used. He knows he's got an offensive-minded coach who's going to be innovative and find ways to get him the ball. And he knows he's going to, be a centerpiece of what Purdue does. So him trusting, Purdue with that sort of entryway into the NFL sort of situation speaks to the trust he has in Jeff Brom, the relationship he has with Jeff Brom and that whole staff, and on down the line. Because again, the biggest part of this is he didn't have to play. He wants to play. He wants to compete, and that says a hell of a lot about Rondell Moore, if you ask me.
Yeah, I think that's true. Tom, obviously, there's a little thing called snapping the ball to the first guy that gets to touch it on every play. That's the quarterback. That is unless Rondell Moore lines up behind center. But here you've got obviously a lot of other talented weapons. But that quarterback position, we saw good things, in my view, out of Aiden O'Connell and Jack Plummer last year. But it still is a battle, and that position needs to be great if Purdue's going to have the kind of season it might be able to have this year.
Yeah, one thing's for sure, guys. For the first time since 2016, Purdue's season opening starting quarterback will not be named Elijah Sinlar. Of course, Sinlar, the big-armed Kentuckian, could have came back for a sixth season, opted not to. He got married. He's working now in the automotive industry. Now Purdue's left with a three-man race to fill his shoes. Plummer, O'Connell, and I guess the X factor in Austin Burton, the UCLA grad transfer. Going to be fun to watch this thing sort out, guys. I still think Plummer's got to be the presumptive number one. He started, I think, 6 games last year. Hurt his ankle against Nebraska in the 9th game. He's healthy, ready to go. A lot to like about the Gilbert, Arizona native. 6'5", 220, smart, hard worker. Needs a little bit better accuracy and pocket presence. A lot to like about O'Connell, more of a classic drop-back quarterback. And like I said, Burton, and Brian's talked about this a lot, Burton embodies maybe some of those athletic characteristics that Jeff Brom wants to embrace more in the quarterback position. But can he get up to speed quickly enough, learn the playbook, develop chemistry? Again, a lot of questions there. But again, guys, the one thing this brings to the position, it's competition. And Jeff Brom loves that.
Yeah, it's going to make a big difference, one would think, in how that evolves. And it's going to have to evolve in a very different environment, obviously, this year with the truncated season and the later start. Brian, defensively, it's an interesting study also in story because you've got a new defensive coordinator. You have extra, maybe a little bit extra spotlight on that because you made a change at that defensive coordinator position when Nick Holt was removed and brought in Bob Diaco. There's talent there, and the defensive line may be as good as you've seen in a while. But tell me what you see and what will be important for that unit to do the job it needs to do from the get-go.
Yeah, I think early in the season, obviously, it comes down to assignments. It comes down to executing what you're supposed to execute. I think Jeff Brom probably wanted to go in a different direction defensively because he wanted to limit big plays. He wanted to be better on third down and third and long, stuff like that. What you don't want to do is bring in a defense now where you're asking guys to do a lot of different stuff they're not accustomed to. You're asking guys to do one thing, one snap, something else the next snap, a pretty significant divergence between the two things, and then have a lot of blown assignments that lead to the very big plays you're trying to cut out. That's probably more an issue earlier in the season than anything, especially this offseason when you didn't have a lot of time to practice. But I think Purdue has good pieces. I think, as you said, I think they've got one of the better defensive lines they've had in quite some time with a bona fide star in George Karlaftis, a couple really good defensive tackles, and a healthy Lorenzo Neal, provided he's healthy, and a senior Anthony Watts, plus all the defensive tackles behind them who got thrown into the mix too early last season, Lawrence Johnson, Jack Sullivan, and on down the line. You have some guys who should be better this year than they were last year. I wonder about Derek Barnes, if he's going to play linebacker this year, what that means for his ability to build on the positive things he did last year. I think the secondary can be pretty solid. They brought in, a good number of grown men here, Giovante Howard, Tyler Coyle, DJ Johnson, provided he's eligible. I think you could see real improvement in the defensive backfield. It comes down to, them being able to do what Bob Diaco wants them to do. And all of the things that Jeff Brom wants from a defense that are the whole reason he made this change in the first place.
Yeah, interesting storyline. So many of them this year. I mean, in terms of this, and then you throw COVID-19 on the pile, and you've got that as well. Tom, obviously practice begins, shells on Monday. We understand if all things go as planned, Wednesday will be the first day in practice. Offensive line, a storyline. There's lots of different storylines that we may not have mentioned. Finding a good running back might be one. What do you prioritize as you try to glean what's going on prior to that opener on October 24th against Iowa?
Yeah, now daily antigen testing will begin Wednesday, September 30th. It's also the first day we expect Purdue to be in full pads. No coincidence. The testing had to start taking place before teams could go full-scale, full-pad football. So it's important to keep note of that. Intensity will pick up. And yeah, boy, the checklist of things to watch on the offensive line is a big one for me. For a lot of people, it's no secret that unit has not lived up to its potential thus far in the Brom era. Jeff has said he has more capable bodies now. We shall see. There's a lot of questions outside of Grant Herman's a left tackle. The linebacking core, Brian hit on that a bit. They need that JC, that giant 6'3", 270-pound JC, DeMarcus Mitchell, to really be a key player, most likely at the cat outside linebacker spot. Special teams, guys. Too often we forget to talk about that. Jeff Brom's on his fourth special teams coach in 4 years. Here comes Marty Biaggi from North Texas, a young assistant who really raised a lot of people's attention down there in Denton, Texas, coaching for Seth Littrell in the Mean Green. I think he's a good young coach with some good ideas. He's going to have to amp up the play on special teams, especially in the return game. If that happens, boy, Purdue could find itself on the plus side of 500 and go into a bowl.
Yeah, and that number 4 guy can help that special teams in a hurry, can he? Yeah, it's no question on that front. Interesting things, developments, things that, and we talked to Tom mentioned about bowls. The Big Ten, as I understand it, may not have any restrictions in terms of number of victories in a bowl, and yet we don't know exactly how the bowl season is going to play out. But Brian, that's another factor that you look at, that another sign of a very different year. Not only 8 games plus 1, and then potentially a bowl game, and all that is going to be an interesting storyline to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said about this COVID-19 stuff, embrace the weirdness. I mean, there's going to be stuff this year that's just different, and it's just kind of enjoy it, the best you can. I know it's going to be a very different product, but the whole no win threshold for the postseason is a little bit of a bridge too far for me. I think you should earn your way into bowl games. I understand circumstances are going to be weird this year, and outcomes are going to be determined by, spit tests and whatnot, as opposed to simply, one team lining up against another and having success. But I think if you're just going to make bowl games TV products, just exhibitions to take whoever you want to take, it would be really unfortunate if somebody actually had a good season and got left out of that because nobody's going to watch them on TV, as opposed to, let's say Michigan gets ravaged by COVID or something like that, loses a couple games because of it, and goes 2-6. That's wholly unlikely, but I'm just saying, let's just say hypothetically that happens. And then somebody takes Michigan, for a bowl game over, let's say Illinois wins 5 games, has a good season by its standards, and they don't get to go because somebody wants to put Michigan on TV instead. That would be unfortunate. I do think that you should not, as weird as this season's going to be, I don't think you should drain all the meaning out of achievement.
Yeah, that's what's going to be a storyline to watch, and we will be watching that. And having access, we'll hearing from players and coaches throughout the course of this week. I think that will be it's just going to be different. And like you said, I think Brian, you said it well. You got to embrace the weirdness of this whole deal. So that will be something we'll be watching. All right, Brian, we will thank you for your time today. And obviously, we got a lot of basketball and other stuff that's going on the site as well for fans that wanted to stay caught up to that. We will dismiss you here shortly and bring in Jerry Donato after we take a 2-minute break. Hang loose, Tom, and we'll look forward to more on Golden Black Live.